Okay, year 9. So I started off this essay for you. Now, I've finished it, but I've also written a second one for you. So we were kind of talking about how the relationship between the inspector and Mr. Burling is presented. And we were having a look at that. Now, I've written a slightly different one for you because I thought this one was a nice, simple way to show you what a grade 4 essay looks like. So, at first, I spoke to you about it shows there's a lot of tension between socialists and capitalists in 1912 because the inspector is a socialist and Mr. Burling is a capitalist. Now, to show you the grade 4 essay, the one that I expect you to be able to do, I've written it in here. So I've written a slightly different one. So Mr. Burling and the inspector have a negative relationship because let's correct that, because they both believe in different things. Mr. Burling believes his business is important, but the inspector feels sorry for the girl who died. Okay, so this is the first part of the grade 4 essay, and then over here is the second. Now, what I've actually done is I've highlighted all the AOs. So there are 3 AOs. So AO1 is what does the writer believe? So anything with quotes and what the writer believes. AO2 is analysing language, and I'll show you how we do that. And AO3 is how does this link to the history or the society at the time. So let's take us back here. So we need to write an introduction. That's the first thing. If you write an introduction, you tell me what you're going to argue, you will get more marks because you'll stop kind of waffling off and it will stop you from going away from your point. So the point here is that the inspector and Mr. Burling have a really tense relationship, a really negative relationship, because they both believe in very different things. Now, you know as well as I do that if you believe it's something very, very different to another person, it can cause you to feel very, very tense with each other. So, firstly, Mr. Burling says he wants to have his business and Gerald's business work together for higher prices. Now, I don't need the whole quote. Look at how I just take a little piece of quote and write it in. This saves me a lot of time. So that's what this is for. I'm just going to summarise the quote and then write in a couple of words from it. So, he says he wants to have his business and Gerald's business work together for higher prices. This shows the audience he is selfish because he cares about making money. Right, can you see where I've switched over to purple here? So I've gone from quotes and what the writer believes to AO2, which is the purple one. And AO2 is a language analysis or character analysis or event analysis. And you can see where actually purple is a huge part of your essay, which means you need to analyse a lot. You need to go into a lot of depth with it. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about the audience. That's the first thing I'm going to do. What does this tell the audience he is? Well, this tells the audience that he is selfish. And the reason for that, and because is your best friend, always tell me because, always tell me why. Because he cares about making money. The inspector contrasts, so there's some subject terminology there. That's a really important word, talking about contrast, how they're different. The inspector contrasts this because he cares about Eva and talks about how she died in a horrible way. I don't need a quote for that because the examiner doesn't mind if you can't use the quote. If you just write in what happened, they're okay with that. Therefore, they are shown to be opposites as the inspector cares more about people than Mr. Burling does. So that's the writer's message, isn't it? Mr. Burling cares less about people than the inspector does, and the inspector cares more about people than Mr. Burling does. So can you see where I've kind of proven my point here? The reason they have a negative relationship is because they are so different. So I'm explaining myself really well because I'm using that word because, and that's really important. I'm telling you why. Yeah, I'm telling you what's going on. Now, I haven't used any history. How does this link to history? But you can see I do it in this next paragraph. So let's have a look at that. Secondly, Mr. Burling tries to make the inspector seem uncomfortable because the inspector is not as high class as Mr. Burling. Anytime you talk about class, it's going to be history because you know the differences. You know that Mr. Burling's going to get more respect because he's higher class. So that's the history of it all. Mr. Burling tells the inspector he used to be Lord Mayor and that he has many friends on the police force. So I'm telling you what the quote is, but now I'm going to explain that quote really well. Okay, I'm going to unpack that quote, tell you why it's important. Burling does this to show he has lots of power because he is upper class. It also shows he does not care about Eva because he is trying to convince the inspector to leave even though he has to investigate. Mr. Burling clearly does not care about others. This could show that Priestley thought the upper class people were selfish, and this could be why the inspector and Mr. Burling have such a negative relationship. That's because the inspector is obviously a lot less selfish than Mr. Burling. So anytime I use words like shows, this shows me, or the audience, that's where I'm going to start seeing those AO2 marks going up loads, okay? So this shows me he, blah. So this shows me he does not care about Eva because, remember that word? He is trying to convince the inspector to leave even though he has to investigate. Mr. Burling clearly does not care about others. So anytime I'm telling you what impression I get from that quote, that's where I'm going to start seeing a lot of marks, okay? So, finally, the inspector says Mr. Burling could have caused a chain of events. This metaphor, because it is a metaphor, because remember it's not an actual chain, like a physical chain, this metaphor means that Mr. Burling started a chain which shows that by firing Eva, he started a lot of terrible things that happened to her, and this led to her death. So I'm explaining the point of why he said that, and that's what I want you to do. Explain the point. Why did he say that? Okay. Where are we? This shows the audience that Mr. Burling hurts others, and the inspector blames him. So again, I'm using that word shows. This shows me. This shows this. This shows the audience. That's really important to get those AO2 marks. Priestley could be showing that capitalists do not care about others. So capitalist being Mr. Burling, remember he cares about profit. That's what capitalists care about. But people like the inspector do, socialists, which makes their relationship tense. So I'm linking back to the question. I'm linking back to my point up here. I'm telling you what Priestley believes. And I'm also using words like capitalist. If I use words like upper class, things that were happening in society, I'm going to actually get those AO3 marks. So that's really important. So when you're getting AO3 marks, you're actually kind of saying, you know, what was happening at the time that made Priestley do it this way, okay? So you'll notice that my purple, my AO2, is the most of my essay. Now, if you compare my essay to your essay, do you see a lot of words like this shows, or the audience, this shows the audience sees this, the audience thinks this? If you're not seeing a lot of those, then actually you might not be explaining yourself well. And if you aren't then using the word because, okay, because I think this because, then actually you're not going to get those really high marks because, again, you're not explaining yourself very well. If you're not using words like upper class or capitalists, things like that when it comes to inspector calls, again, you're not explaining yourself well, and you need to make sure you've done that as well. Now, this is my grade 4 essay, and this kind of essay is something that you could write to get yourself a really, really good mark. So what I want you to do, and I will explain it in the writing section, is basically tell me, if you compare your essay that you wrote the other day to this essay, what does your essay need to improve? So when you look at your essay, have you got enough AO2? Have you used words like this shows, or have you explained why you think that by using words like because? Have you used any AO3? Have you talked about words like capitalism or upper class? And have you told me what the writer believes? So their actual opinion. So Priestley could be showing that capitalists do not care about others. Well, that's his opinion as well, isn't it? Okay, so that's what I want you to focus on, making sure that that you know that if your essay looks like this or if it doesn't. So that's what you need to do. So you need to write me a few bullet points and ideas about what could make your essay better so it looks more like this essay. So read your essay again, now you've seen this, and actually tell me what is missing from that essay, okay? So well done for watching this. I hope these are helping you. I'll keep making them as long as they help you. Make sure that you are keeping up to date with your work. Well done, Year 9.